a wingspan of 36 feet, the length of a city bus, held aloft on wings of hollow bone and skin. And yet, this animal, this creature that should not have been able to fly by almost any rule of physics we understand, did not just glide, it soared, actively, for thousands of miles. That is where the story of Quetzalcoatlus begins. Not with a mystery, not with a question, but with a fact that feels like it was invented by someone who didn't understand the rules. The largest flying animal in the history of life on Earth could fly. Really fly. And we still aren't entirely sure how. How do you put a creature the size of a small plane into the air? How does evolution, which is precise and merciless and wastes nothing, arrive at something that looks, on paper, like it should be impossible? And what does it mean that for a brief, extraordinary window of geological time, something like this actually existed? Let us start with what Quetzalcoatlus actually was, because the name alone tells you something. Named for Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of the Aztec and Mesoamerican traditions, a being that was both earthly and divine, that moved between worlds. The scientists who named it were not being poetic, they were being accurate. Quetzalcoatlus was a pterosaur, not a dinosaur. This is one of the most common confusions in all of paleontology, and it matters. Dinosaurs ruled the land. Pterosaurs ruled the sky. They were cousins sharing a common reptilian ancestor, but they were never the same animal. And of all the pterosaurs that ever lived, and there were hundreds of species across 150 million years, Quetzalcoatlus northropi was the largest, by a significant margin. When Douglas Lawson first found its bones in Big Bend National Park in Texas in 1971, he thought he had found part of a bird. Then he found more bones. Then he measured them. The humerus, the upper arm bone, was nearly 2 feet long. When he and his advisor Juan Langston Jr. calculated the full wingspan, the number that came back was almost 40 feet. They ran it again. The number did not change. 40 feet, the wingspan of a small propeller aircraft. The scientific community did not quite believe it. Papers were written, arguing the estimates were inflated. Some paleontologists proposed the animal could not fly at all, that something this large must have been a ground-dwelling scavenger, running after carcasses like an enormous, leathery vulture. The debate went on for decades, and in some corners it still does. But the bones kept turning up, and the physics, slowly, reluctantly, began to bend toward the impossible. Here is the thing about pterosaur bones. They were built for a purpose that seems contradictory. Strong enough to launch an animal weighing over 500 pounds into the air. Light enough that the weight did not make flight impossible in the first place. Think about a drinking straw. Run your thumb along the outside and it is thin, almost fragile. But compress it lengthwise and it holds its shape surprisingly well. The engineering works not because of thickness, but because of structure. Pterosaur bones worked the same way. The walls of their long bones were sometimes less than 2 millimeters thick, thinner than a credit card, with hollow chambers inside reinforced by internal struts. A complete Quetzalcoatlus skeleton, fully assembled, probably weighed no more than 500 pounds despite its enormous scale. 500 pounds. The weight of a large black bear suspended on wings built from bones you could almost crush with your hands. The wings themselves were made of a membrane called the patagium, stretched from an enormously elongated fourth finger. Not feathers, not scales, but a sheet of living tissue threaded with muscle, blood vessels, and a network of stiff fibers called actinofibrils that gave the wing its shape and tension. It was more like a bat's wing than a bird's, but more sophisticated than either. It could be adjusted, tensioned, angled. The animal had real aerodynamic control, not just passive gliding. This is where the story gets genuinely strange. Imagine the last time you stood up quickly from a chair. Your legs bear the load. Your core stabilizes. Your arms might push off the armrests. You have been doing it your whole life without thinking. Now imagine doing that with wings. Birds launch by jumping into the air and catching lift almost immediately. Bats hang upside down and drop into flight. For Quetzalcoatlus, for any giant pterosaur, neither of those solutions worked. The legs were too short for a running takeoff at that body mass. The wings folded in the wrong direction for hanging from branches. What researchers eventually worked out, through a combination of biomechanical modeling and careful analysis of the musculature implied by the bone structure, is that Quetzalcoatlus used all 4 limbs to launch, the wing hands planted on the ground, the rear legs pushed back simultaneously, and in a single explosive movement, the animal vaulted upward, not gradually, not gracefully, but in one violent burst of energy that could generate more force than any bird alive today is capable of. Like a pole vaulter without the pole, all stored energy, all commitment. The launch itself, once airborne, probably took less than 2 seconds. From standing still on the ground to being 20 feet in the air, wings already catching the wind. The speed required to generate that burst of upward force has been estimated at over 10 times the animal's body weight in muscular output. For a fraction of a second, Quetzalcoatlus was the most powerful flying animal that has ever existed. And then, silence. Open sky. Picture West Texas, 68 million years ago. The Cretaceous sky is not quite the sky we know. The air is warmer, denser. The sea that split North America into 2 great land masses, the Western Interior Seaway, still exists, though it is beginning its long retreat. The landscape below is a coastal floodplain threaded with rivers, thick with cycads and early flowering plants, populated by creatures that will be gone in a geological instant. Quetzalcoatlus flies low over the water. Not gliding, actively flying, the enormous wings stroking with a slow, powerful rhythm, each downstroke generating an audible displacement of air. Its shadow crosses the water below like a moving eclipse. It angles its head. Those eyes, large, forward-facing, giving it binocular depth perception that few animals of its era possessed, fix on something beneath the surface. A movement, a flash of scale. The neck extends. The jaw, 5 feet of bone ending in a sharp, toothless tip, opens slightly. And then everything happens very fast. The animal drops toward the water. Not a dive, more of a controlled plunge. Legs extended, wings half folded to reduce drag. The beak breaks the surface in a single precise movement, closing around whatever moved below. The neck absorbs the impact. The wings catch air again before the body ever touches the water. From above, if you were watching, it would look almost lazy. The whole thing takes perhaps 4 seconds. Below the surface, a fish the length of your arm is gone. Here is where Quetzalcoatlus surprises people who think they already understand it. For a long time, the dominant image was exactly what that last scene described: a giant wading bird, a Cretaceous heron, skimming water, plucking fish, making sense. But Quetzalcoatlus northropi, the very largest species, the one with the 40-foot wingspan, was not found near water. It was found inland, far inland. In Big Bend, which was a semi-arid floodplain in the Cretaceous, not a coastline, there were no large lakes nearby. No evidence of consistent fish populations in the sedimentary record of the region. So what was it eating? The answer that emerged from years of analysis is one of the most unexpected things in all of pterosaur paleontology. Quetzalcoatlus northropi was probably a terrestrial stalker, like a giraffe, like a stork, but scaled up to something that towered over a grown man. When Quetzalcoatlus was on the ground and it spent real time on the ground, it stood on all fours, with the wing hands acting as forelegs. Its posture was columnar, like an elephant or a giraffe, with the weight distributed through stiff vertical limbs rather than the sprawling posture of a lizard. At full terrestrial height, the head crested over 16 feet off the ground. 16 feet, higher than a one-story building. It walked through the late Cretaceous landscape with a slow, deliberate gait, that 5-foot beak angled toward the ground, likely searching for small dinosaurs, mammals, lizards, hatchlings, whatever moved and was small enough to swallow, which was a wide category for an animal that size. Think about that for a moment. This creature, this 40-foot wingspan animal that was also capable of sustained flight across hundreds of miles, was also a terrestrial predator that walked upright through a world of dinosaurs, picking up prey the way a heron picks up frogs at the edge of a pond. Just at a scale that makes the comparison feel inadequate. It was 2 apex predators in one body, one in the air, one on the ground. The debate over whether Quetzalcoatlus could actually fly lasted longer than it should have, in part because the physics seemed impossible, and in part because the fossil record for giant pterosaurs is maddeningly incomplete. Hollow bones do not preserve well, wings disintegrate. What we have is fragments, impressions, partial skeletons, enough to reconstruct the shape, not always enough to reconstruct the motion. But the models kept improving. Wind tunnel tests on scaled models, computer simulations of wing geometry, analysis of the muscle attachment points on the bones. And what the data eventually converged on was this. At its body mass and wingspan, Quetzalcoatlus was a thermal soarer of exceptional efficiency. Thermals are columns of warm air that rise from sun-heated ground. Birds use them constantly. Eagles, vultures, storks, any large bird that needs to cover distance without exhausting itself rides thermals, circling upward in one column, gliding across to the next, circling upward again. It is an energy economy. Rise for free, travel for free. Quetzalcoatlus, at that wingspan, was almost uniquely suited to thermal soaring. A longer wingspan means more surface area interacting with the thermal column, which means more lift for the same amount of energy. The models suggest it could reach altitudes of 15,000 feet, that it could cruise at speeds approaching 80 miles per hour, that a single thermal-assisted journey, without actively flapping more than necessary, could cover thousands of miles. The estimate that emerged from one particularly careful 2021 study: Quetzalcoatlus could have crossed the Atlantic Ocean, non-stop, not as a freak event, not as a once-in-a-lifetime feat of desperation, but as something within the ordinary envelope of its capabilities. To understand Quetzalcoatlus, you need to understand what it meant for pterosaurs to have the sky at all, and how long they held it. Pterosaurs first appeared about 228 million years ago, in the late Triassic. From the very beginning, they were already flying. There is no protopterosaur in the fossil record learning to glide, no missing link between a ground-dwelling ancestor and a powered flyer. They appear in the rocks already sophisticated, already committed. For 162 million years, they were the undisputed masters of the air. Dinosaurs ruled the ground. Marine reptiles ruled the seas. Pterosaurs owned everything above. They diversified into hundreds of forms, small ones the size of sparrows, filter feeders with enormous crests, fish hunters, insect catchers, possibly even warm-blooded ones covered in a fur-like structure called pycnofibers that insulated their bodies against the cold of altitude. Birds appeared during this time. About 150 million years ago, and for the next 80 million years, pterosaurs and birds shared the sky. They were not competitors in the way we sometimes imagine. Most pterosaurs specialized in niches that early birds could not access, and vice versa. The two groups coexisted, diversified in parallel, filled different ecological roles in the same Mesozoic skies. Quetzalcoatlus represents the end of that story. Not a beginning, not a middle. The very last chapter of 162 million years of pterosaur history. By the time it was flying over the late Cretaceous floodplains of what is now Texas, its lineage was ancient beyond comprehension. It was the heir to an aerial dynasty that had been ruling the sky since before the first flower bloomed, since before the first mammal took its first uncertain steps. It is also the last of its kind. 66 million years ago, an asteroid approximately 6 miles across entered Earth's atmosphere at roughly 45,000 miles per hour. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons simultaneously. The Chicxulub crater it created in what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula is 110 miles wide. What followed was not a single catastrophe, but a cascade. Fires across multiple continents. A debris cloud that blocked sunlight for years. The collapse of the food chains that photosynthesis had been sustaining for hundreds of millions of years. Ocean acidification, a years-long winter that killed the plants that the herbivores needed, which killed the carnivores that fed on the herbivores. Quetzalcoatlus was alive on the morning of the impact. It was gone within a time span that, geologically speaking, is invisible. Not because it was poorly adapted, not because its design had failed, because the asteroid did not ask whether anything deserved to survive. Every pterosaur species on Earth died in that event. The lineage that had been flying since the Triassic, that had survived the end Triassic extinction, that had outlasted dozens of mass die-offs and climate shifts and sea level changes across 162 million years, gone. Completely. Without a single surviving branch, the sky that pterosaurs had held for over 150 million years belonged, after the impact, entirely to birds. Birds which had survived because they were small, and because some of them could eat seeds which persist through winters that destroy everything else. The inheritors of the sky were not the mightiest, they were the ones that could wait. Quetzalcoatlus waited too long, or rather, it never had to wait, until the one thing came that left Namtimi. There is a direct line between Quetzalcoatlus and the moment humanity first seriously imagined human flight. It runs through Leonardo da Vinci. In the 1480s, da Vinci filled notebooks with designs for flying machines. He was obsessed with the mechanics of bird wings, the way feathers angle, the way weight shifts, the relationship between wingspan and body mass. He understood intuitively what engineers would not formalize for centuries: that lift is not magic. It is geometry. It is physics. It is solvable. What da Vinci did not have, what no one in the 15th century had, was Quetzalcoatlus. The concept that nature itself had already solved the problem of flying at scales that dwarfed anything he was imagining. That somewhere in the rock of West Texas, the blueprint for a 400-kilogram flyer sat waiting, perfectly preserved in hollow bone. But there is something more direct than that. Modern aerospace engineers studying the aerodynamics of giant pterosaurs have found that the membrane wing structure, that thin, fiber-reinforced sheet that spanned Quetzalcoatlus's 40-foot frame, shares functional characteristics with modern flexible wing designs used in hang gliders and parafoils. Not because anyone copied it, because the physics of generating lift at large scales converges toward the same solutions, regardless of whether the designer is evolution or an engineer. Quetzalcoatlus did not know it was solving an engineering problem, but it was. For 162 million years of pterosaur history, the sky was filled with flying creatures that had worked out, through trial and extinction and diversification, every major principle of aerodynamics we now use to keep airplanes in the sky. We discovered flight. Pterosaurs invented it, twice. Stand in front of a Quetzalcoatlus reconstruction. Not an illustration, a full-scale mount, the kind some natural history museums have begun to install. Look at the head first. That 5-foot beak pointed like a spear, with the backward sweeping crest rising above the skull. The eyes are positioned to give forward binocular vision, a predator's eyes. They look back at you with something that is not quite a reptile's blankness. There is something calculated about the placement of those eyes. Then look at the neck. 6 feet of carefully engineered bone and tendon, curving slightly downward at rest, capable of that explosive extension when striking. Then the body surprisingly compact for the wingspan, about the size of a large pony if you stripped away the wings. Then the wings themselves, even folded, they are extraordinary. The fourth finger, modified over millions of years of pterosaur evolution into a wing spar, extends from the hand longer than a grown man is tall. The membrane drapes from it, folded neatly against the body, waiting. The whole animal is improbable in the specific way that only real things are improbable. Fictional monsters are too coherent. Evolution produces things with seams showing, compromises, tensions, features pulled in different directions by different selective pressures. Quetzalcoatlus shows all of that. The enormous head that should have made flight impossible, the hollow bones that make the skeleton feel like a contradiction, the terrestrial posture that does not match our expectations of a flyer, the size that violated what we thought the sky could hold. It is not a fantasy. It is more unsettling than any fantasy. It is the thing that actually existed. Have you ever stood in a large open field and felt genuinely small? Not metaphorically, physically. The sky above you seems to extend forever. The horizon is far away in every direction, and in that openness, you become aware of your own scale in a way that enclosed spaces never produce. Now imagine that same field 68 million years ago. The sky above it is not empty. It holds something that should not fit there. A shape that crosses the sun too slowly to be a bird, too gracefully to be anything mechanical, too large for your mind to immediately categorize. Its shadow crosses the ground, 36 feet wide, moving at the speed of a car on a country road. It circles once, then the thermals carry it south, and in less than a minute, it is too high to see clearly. Just a shape, a silhouette, and then nothing. For 162 million years, the sky held shapes like that. Animals that mastered altitude and distance, that crossed oceans and continents, that looked down at a world teeming with other giants from a vantage point nothing else alive could share. And then, 66 million years ago, on a single morning, they were gone. The sky has been quieter since. Here is what we still do not know and may never know about Quetzalcoatlus. We do not know if it was warm-blooded or cold-blooded, though the energy requirements of powered flight at that scale suggest it must have had a high metabolic rate, which points toward endothermy. We do not know if it had pycnofibers covering its body, though closely related pterosaurs did, and there are hints in some specimens. We do not know how it cared for its young, though evidence from other pterosaur species suggests they grew quickly and may have received some level of parental attention. We do not know how long it lived. We do not know how it communicated, whether that head crest was for display, for species recognition, or for something else entirely. We do not know if it flew at night. We do not know how far a single individual ranged in its lifetime. We do not know whether they gathered in groups or lived largely solitary lives, crossing the same skies without ever choosing to share them. And most profoundly, We do not know exactly how many species of giant Ajdarchid pterosaur, Quetzalcoatlus's family, there were, because the fossil record is so fragmentary. Every new excavation in the right rock layers has the potential to reveal something that rewrites the picture. There may have been giants we have not found yet. There may have been specializations and behaviors and capabilities that we cannot infer from bones alone. The full truth of Quetzalcoatlus may be locked in rock that has not been found, or in tissue that did not preserve, or in behaviors that left no trace. What we do know is this: something the size of an aircraft, built from bones thinner than your thumbnail, once threw itself into the sky from the ground of Texas and flew. Really flew. For distances we are still calculating. With precision we are still modeling. Across a world that no longer exists, under a sky that remembered nothing after the asteroid came. It existed. It mastered its world so completely that it remained at the apex of the aerial food chain for the final chapter of the longest reign the sky has ever known. And then it was gone, not because it failed, but because the rules changed faster than anything alive could adapt. There is something in that story that stays with you. The idea that supreme adaptation is not the same as immunity, that the most extraordinary solution to a problem is still just a solution to that specific problem, that the sky, which pterosaurs had held for 162 million years, was not theirs to keep, only theirs to use for the time they had. Which raises a question that the fossil record cannot answer, but that the animal itself seems to ask every time you stand in front of a reconstruction and look up at that 40-foot wingspan. What is flying over us right now that we do not have the perspective to see? If Quetzalcoatlus stayed with you, and I think it will, there are more stories like this one waiting here. Creatures that held the sky, the sea, and the land in ways that make our world look like a rough draft. If you want to keep finding them, subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more people stumble onto these stories who might need them.